Thank you, Dr. Devi. Thanks for the kind introduction. To begin with, first of all, I would like to thank IACC for inviting me and giving the opportunity to share the experience we gained during our automation. So thank you, Dr. Devi. So I'm sharing my screen now. So is my screen visible? So hope my screen is visible. So just to briefly introduce about the our laboratory. So Dr. Lal Path Lab is established. It has completed 70 years of establishment in the country. It was set up by late father of our chairman, Dr. Arvind Lal. The lab, as on today, we handle approximately 50,000 patients every day. The lab is spread, the lab has collection centers and patient service center throughout the country. We have, as on today, about 190 labs, 1,700 patient service center, 5,000 pickup points, and catering to almost 4,500 tests, all routine as well as highly specialized esoteric tests in the country. We have reference lab. The lab you are seeing, this is set up in Delhi. This is our national reference lab. And our lab is NABL as well as CAP accredited. So coming to the topic today, that is digitalization and automation. So way back, way back 2010, when we were handling about 7,000 to 8,000 samples a day, we opted for task-targeted automation. In the task-targeted automation, we primarily it helped us in decapping, aliquoting, and identifying the team custody. So from 2010, as our sample volume started to grow, by 2017, we were handling nearly 15 to 16,000 tubes a day, and it was becoming day by day challenging for us to handle by our work process to maintain TAT using task-targeted automation. Sharing sample was a major problem for us. So I think all of us, all labs face these challenges. So these were the common challenges which we were facing. So we decided to started to do lean workshops, started to work that how we can optimize our workflow process. So 2020, we went live with our Total Lab Automation project, which comprised not only the action automation, which includes the robotics, but also the decision automation. That is the intelligent software, the middleware, intelligent IT solutions, the process manager. They all helped us to optimize the solutions. So action automation, which primarily consists of robotics, the robotics generally help us to help to do the repetitive task which is done by the staff. So robotic helps in the transportation of the samples, repetitive task of decapping, sorting sample done by the staff, whereas the decision automation, digitalization, it has helped us to give us insight into our processes. Once the process has started, we need to be in the control of the process. We want to have a sense that we have the control on the process. So digitalization, it not only helps in the standardization and optimization of the process, it gives the intelligent reports, the intelligent data analysis, helps us to understand the processes, helps in the optimization, and it helps us to identify error. Looking at these reports, we can take corrective action which can further optimize our process. So during this, so in short, the Total Lab Automation is the use of robots to automate highly repetitive routine tasks normally performed by knowledge workers, coupled with the application of digital intelligence to the data sets generated during the workflow. So how digitalization has helped our lab, I'll be discussing three case studies observed in our lab where we used the intelligent solution provided by Italica Data Manager and Italica Process Manager in every area of pre-analytical in terms of reducing the aliquots, in analytical area by leveraging patient moving average and ultimately leading to improvement in auto verification logics and real-time operational analytics, that is post-analytical analysis of the data, which during especially in the COVID area really helped us to manage our inventory, identify the process, and leading to improvement in leading to improvement and maintaining that. So as I mentioned that we know that when we integrate chemistry in any lab, any routine clinical chemistry, the samples, it's a common scenario that the samples are shared between clinical chemistry and immunoassay. So when we were doing task targeted automation, all the samples, we had around 25 to 30% of the samples which was shared between chemistry and immunoassay. So since they were standalone analytics, all these samples were being aliquoted. So nearly we were making about 4,000 aliquots during that era. So pre-automation era, we were making around 4,000 aliquotings. So by sheer consolidation of chemistry and immunoassay on our track system helped us to reduce our aliquots, number of aliquots per day from 4,000 to 2,000 tubes in a day. That was a significant reduction which we achieved. But we wanted further optimization because still there were 1,000 aliquots which were being made. They were handled by the staff manually, and also in terms of making aliquot, we were having challenges that sometimes the quantity was not sufficient to make enough number of aliquots. All those samples were going into error racks. Then again, the error samples, they required manual handling. So with the help of intelligent aliquoting logic, which was built, this helped us to reduce the number of aliquots per day to further. Just to brief about the intelligence which was built into the system. So LIS, whenever there is a order for aliquot from the LIS, this will look for if the order is for single test. So if the order is a single test and this test is not meant for aliquot, the primary tube is sorted out. So no aliquot is made if it is a single test. The primary tube itself is sorted out for the samples which are not to be run on the track. So the next logic, it will check if it requires multiple aliquot for the off-track test. Means the tube has 2 or more off-track tests and they require aliquoting. So if that was the scenario, the intelligence was built to set high priority. So those tests which are high priority tests, they are sorted out and aliquot is given to the another section. So so as long as we are able to use primary sort, we are like, instead of making 2 or more aliquots, we gave one, the intelligence was built to give primary tube to the high priority section and the other sections getting aliquots. And if it has a multiple aliquot which are off track and there are tests for the on track, so the primary tube goes on the track, the test on the track is performed, and then that primary tube is sorted out for the high priority, this thing. So basically a lot of intelligence was built. It's a very, very complex algorithm. I would thank our partners who helped us in building this algorithm. We actually pushed them hard to give us this kind of intelligence, and they are able to provide. So happily, the effect of that now as on today, the percentage aliquoting has reduced to 400 tubes. So it's not only reduction on the aliquot tube, the advantage which we got by this reduction. So you can see that from this, that in the month of May, almost 9 to 10%, May, June, July, 8 to 9% of samples were being aliquoted. Whereas as we keep on building the logics, these intelligence logic, as on May 21, so in a span of 1 year, we have been able to reduce the aliquot from 10% to 2% in a 1 year time period. The added advantage is that there is a significant reduction in the QNS error samples, 30% reduction in the 2019. When we compare from 2019, this is a data from August to December, August to December 2019, when we compare August to December 2020, there is a 30% reduction in the QNS error. Thus, definitely reduction in QNS errors, this helps you to give a better satisfaction, better patient care, because the patient doesn't need to come back to give you the repeat sample, and you can maintain TAT, because with the same volume of sample, you are able to give out now report to the patient. So not only this thing, the solution, the Aliquot solution, the sample volume required is less as compared to the legacy instrument. That is also an addition to the reduction in Aliquot, which helped us to achieve this reduction in QNS error. So, it reduces the human error, cost, error, everything is optimized. So this is again the pictorial presentation of the reduction from 10% to 2%. So another, in addition to that, the patient moving average is, we were using auto verification algorithms. Prior to automation, we had built-in checks in our LIMS, but the patient moving average, which gives us a control or analytical part, we were looking for an intelligent middleware or intelligent software, which can help us to review patient moving average, and which gives us a more confidence in detecting systemic error. We know that as on today, we run QC levels, 2 level of QC in every 8-hour shift. But running the QC is a point in time error you can identify. But in between those 8 hours, if there is some error, that may go undetected. And that was the reason we were giving very tight limits for auto verification. So what is patient moving average? We all understand that the patient moving average are running averages of patient results for a specific assay over a preset number of data points. And historically, it has been commonly used in hematology laboratory, but with computing power made available, the data management through data management systems, patient moving average are increasingly used in chemistry and immunodiagnostic as an adjunct to the QC process. The benefits of patient moving average, that as I mentioned, that if we are running QC 8 hourly, it's a point in time error we can detect, but the patient moving average, because it's a continuous monitoring, the shifts and changes can be detected before errors are detected by the QC events. Another advantage, patient moving average can detect systemic error in assay performance attributable to specific reagent lot or specific reagent bottle itself. It solves, because definitely if we want to have tighter control, we have either increase the frequency of QC material. Increasing the frequency of QC material would mean that you increase the cost of the lab. But using this patient moving average, we saves the cost and effort of no additional QC material and reagent required. In addition, this also meets the requirement of auto verification guidelines. CLSI guideline Auto 10A states that the labs who are using auto verification, they should use patient moving average to identify any systemic error. So how we leverage this just to give you an example. So in our middleware, the first thing, what we need to, whenever we begin to implement Meson moving average, the basic requirement is that we should be able to identify what is the mean I should set, what is the deviation I should allow. But for that, I need to have a middleware which give me insight into what is the moving average for my analytes, instrument wise as well as analyte wise. So the middleware, the initially this we call as undefined PMA, or the passive monitoring of moving average. For the passive monitoring of moving average, you don't need anything. It just allows you to monitor the average. To begin with, now we just have to define the batch size and put truncation limits. Truncation limits means you would not want very absurd value to be included in the average, because if the values are very absurd, this may affect the average overall mean, and you may not get true picture in the true picture of mean. So we allowed passive monitoring. So here you can say no target value or no target deviation is allowed. No chart is being plotted, but this gives you insight. This mean and this ST you can observe for to understand what is the mean. So here you can see that for this analyte IL6, 19, 15, 15, these are the moving averages we were observing. So once you have observed, we have the advantage that we have 9 IM modules on our track, and we have 6 of chemistry. So for every analyte, we have multiple instrument also. So we compared, we observed for 15 days or 2 weeks. We started with lipid profile. We started observing the moving average for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, we saw the consistent average across platform. So we define the target value. So this example is for FT4, where we define the target value and target deviation. This is one of the module, that is Italica 5. It shows here the string value. This is a moving average. So this one value is a average of the batch size, and this average is calculated on the Bull's algorithm. You can see the mean, you can see ST, you can see how it is plotted. So all the averages are moving within one ST. So to define ST, there are various logics which are built. Some labs use delta check value, some use analytical ST, but that is by and large hit and trial method, that trial and error method, which by looking at your data, you will be able to identify. It's by a click of button. This is the home screen of the middleware we have, that is a Italica data manager, where if there is any outlier in the moving average, that will be displayed on the screen. So this QC alert screen is displaying that there are 3 outliers. So we just click on this. As soon as we click on this, this takes us to the QC screen, which shows what are the outliers. So here we can see the 3 outliers are total T4, which is not acceptable on 2 of the instrument, that is instrument 5 and 9, and total protein. So here we see this graph is very clearly showing that we have outlier which are 1, 3s. The Westcott, which rule is not followed, or which rule failed, it is displayed here. So it's very clearly visible, and when we click these buckets, with these click of these buttons, we can see what are the values we are observing. As soon as the rule failed, all the results which have failed, they are held for review. So this is the result review window. We can see that T3 and TSH, they are uploaded, but T4, since it had an outlier, it is held for review and it is highlighted in red, which immediately attracts attention of the reviewer that there is something is wrong. So we can deep dive, we can review the patient data, we can review the QC charts, and that gives us time to take corrective action. So this is showing that this is how the moving average was moving day on day, but on this particular day, we observed there is a failure. And we did the troubleshooting, the RCA was done, and after taking the corrective action, again T4 moving averages has come back to the normal report. So the advantage is that you are not releasing any wrong report. As soon as you observe there is a failure, all the results which are required to be reviewed, they are held in the review screen. This is to show that so we started implementing, as I said, that we started auto verification in lipid profile, and then we moved to KFT. And as we started implementing, because when we got confidence that systemic, we are able, with the help of this moving average, any systemic error we will be able to identify. We improved the auto verification limits. We enlarged, we implemented flexible auto verification limits, and we were able to achieve an auto verification up to 70% for routine chemistry and immunoassay, which is the bulk of the volume. So in the post analytical, and in addition, not only moving average, we can also, with the help of middleware, we have defined rules for rerun, dilution, the analytical measurement range, where if the result goes beyond the AMR, the tech doesn't have to search for that sample. It is then and there on the track held in the RSMs, and the sample just comes out and is rerun. So any review for instrument flag, hill flag, all these error samples, they are held, and the staff now just has to focus on these error sample rather than offloading of all the tubes, thousands of the tubes we were handling. So with the COVID came in, India saw unprecedented number of the cases in the month of April, May. So we really had a very high number of COVID positive patients. During this peak, there was a sudden change. What we observed, that there was a sudden change in test mix. Routine test like LFT, KFT, thyroid profile, they started going down. And what we were getting, huge volumes of IL-6, CRP, ferritin. So we observed a test mix change. The digitalization provided us the visibility in the test mix arriving sample. It gives us a visibility, what are the tests which we are getting in the maximum volume, what is the time these samples are hitting us. So with full visibility and remote monitoring of onboard reagent and consumable, we were able to manage the extremely high sample workload without any significant disruption. So this is with the help, Atalica process manager is a post analytic process manager, from which we get various reports, and this screen is giving us information about the sample arrival pattern. So early morning, this is 4 a.m. to night till 10 p.m. So what we observed, we have two rack input module, which gives, using these two rack input module, we have the capacity to handle 1600 tubes in an hour. But what we observed, that in the morning, we were able to achieve the required throughput, which was around 1500 to 1200. But in the at the time of 11 p.m. or 12 noon in the afternoons, we saw significant reduction in the throughput of the rims, whereas we could see that there are volume of tubes which are lying on our table, but still we were not achieving the required throughput. So we further deep dive the data. So this data is when this is prior to having the COVID. This was our routine real time. This was a normal test mix. Because we can see that TSH3 was highest this COVID outbreak. Total routine reaction, the highest volume parameter. But when we reviewed throughput, we saw that CRP became the maximum. The test mix during COVID changed 85% of the tubes. They had single test time. We had CRP, we had ferritin. These were the highest volume. further investigating revealed that because CRP became the highest volume parameter and it was a single test tube, we observed that some of the analytes, this is indicating the 6 chemistry module we have. When we looked at the inventory of the CRP, we found that probably because of the high high volume of CRP, if we observe the time 11 to 12, that is 8 a.m. to this 11:12, we are observing that the inventory on these 4 analyzer was exhausted. So because the inventory was exhausted, the CRP, only 2 modules were available for CRP, and leading to reduction in throughput because the contribution of CRP as a single test was very high. So the staff was instructed, they were made to understand, they started maintaining inventory all across the instrument as per the suggestions given by APM. So now we can see that from 10th May onward, we saw that improvement in the processing. So the number of tests being processed, there was a load balancing leading to improvement in the throughput. So this slide is indicating, now we were saying that in the early mornings we was receiving very high number, we were achieving good throughput, but 11 to 12 there was a compromise in the throughput. But with this load balancing, we were able to achieve the required throughput. So again, the same scenario, 10th May, 12th May, with this, we were able to achieve, and we were able to improvise further, and we were able to achieve the TAT. This screen just to show that how this intelligent system, we can see that here all our IMs, the CRP reagents, the number of CRP reagent loaded. This one screen gives us the information about all the different instrument. They are the number of tests available on those different instrument. It also gives us information about the expiry, when they were calibrated. So the entire information is available on one screen. So the tech doesn't have to run from one instrument to another instrument to gather the information. Just to show you the improvement in the TAT, this is in the 2019, because I mentioned that we had standalone equipment, biochemistry and immunoassay, the mean TAT was around 80 to 85%. Though we were able to achieve this TAT, but 85% of the way, the TAT defined for our lab for these tests is 2 hours. So 88% or 80% of the samples we were able to report in 2 hours. But if we look at the ST, it was not consistent. The ST was very, very high. With the implementation of total lab automation, we were able to achieve an OTR of, that is overall time for reporting, to 92% with a reduction in ST to 3.2 minutes. So to summarize, the COVID-19 waves in India witnessed an unprecedented volume of tubes samples arriving, while there were significant lesser staff reporting to work. And definitely because COVID, I think every household was affected by COVID-19. We had many staff who were not able to join the duty because either they themselves were not well, or somebody in the family was infected by COVID-19 positive. So the staff reduced, whereas the sample volume increased tremendously. But under such circumstances, digitalization and digital resources helped us considerably in amplifying the capability of the existing resources as below. So with the digital decision in terms of patient moving average and auto verification, because as mentioned that we were able to verify now 70 to 80% of the results without any manual intervention. So that also helped us in optimizing our work, real-time monitoring and managing optimal onboard inventory levels, intelligent aliquoting logic. This has helped enhance the efficiency of the overall workflow within the lab, while also serving patients with faster and better outcomes. We believe that there is more to achieve, and we continue to move forward in this fascinating. Definitely, we have just started to utilizing these intelligent software, and we hope that we will continue to improve with this in this journey. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for patient hearing. Over to Dr. Devi.
Thank you, Dr. Nimmi, for very interesting presentation and share with us about your transformation with the TLA, Total Laboratory Automation, yeah, combination of digitalization and automation. The conclusion is all your did improve process and also outcomes. Thank you very much, and we will have a discussion after the second topics.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Now we proceed to next topics from Deloitte. We will have two speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Kavita Rekhraj. I will read her CVs. Kavita leads Deloitte's life sciences and healthcare practice in Southeast Asia and brings more than 20 years of consulting experience. Her areas of expertise include business transformation across corporate planning, digital transformation, customer engagement, operational efficiency, and shared services from design through to implementations. She also sits on Deloitte's Global Life Sciences and Healthcare leadership and is a member of Deloitte's Global Life Sciences and Healthcare Council. Kavita works extensively with both public and private sector clients across Southeast Asia and the broader Asia Pacific, Europe, and USA, conducting commercial due diligence and market assessments and end-to-end digital transformation strategy. She brings a consumer-centric view and insight and her capabilities to serve some of the most pressing issues faced by life sciences and healthcare providers in Southeast Asia. Due to you, Deloitte will have two speakers, so I continue read the speaker. The second speaker is Steve Aditya. Pak Steve is currently the country leader for life science and healthcare industry in Indonesia and has extensive experience in business process enhancement, corporate strategy, and analytics. During his 15 years tenure, he has worked for multinational as well as local pharmaceutical companies with exposure in animal health business and with various roles, sales and marketing, commercial excellence business, development and strategic planning with high exposure to Southeast Asia markets. He spent his earlier career in consulting area, working for projects such as market entry strategy, portfolio optimization, distributorships model, pricing strategy, and organizations development for various industries. He has many professional experience. I will not read all, but I think Pak Steve is very professional in life science, healthcare fields. Yeah. So for Deloitte's teams, the time is yours for another 30 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Ibu Devi, and thank you very much, I guess, to the IACC team for inviting us this afternoon to share some of our thoughts. So we'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about, what are the implications of COVID-19 on the healthcare ecosystem. I'd also like to congratulate Dr. Nimmi for a very comprehensive, presentation. I think a very good example of how organizations are actually leveraging, digital and data to improve efficiencies and drive the business in this very sort of challenging times. But as we know, over the last 18 months or so, the world has been disrupted. I mean, we all know that healthcare systems have obviously been hit, or should I say, been forced to relook in terms of how the whole ecosystem should, leverage going forward. And some of the concepts and thinking that, we would let's say 2 years ago, as we would talk and think about the healthcare system, would say, this would be the future of healthcare in, let's say, 20, 30 years. I think a lot of those concepts and thinking that, those ideas that were there before are really very much real today, and are really coming to us sooner than we think. So we'd like to start off with just a short video to share what are some of these thoughts and ideas and how this future could actually be closer than we might expect. So let's give that a start.
This is Maria and her partner, Ruben. Before their day even starts, they are providing a detailed snapshot of their health and wellness to their network. Maria slept great, but Ruben, who has a history of depression and anxiety, tossed and turned all night. Data from his neuroendocrine system shows a spike in cortisol. That may be a sign that he could be headed for a significant depressive episode. So, before he's even awake, his network has placed time in his busy schedule that day to talk with a virtual therapist about ways to reduce his stress. 20 years from now, radically interoperable data and open and secure platforms will allow consumers to own their own journey of health, providing them with a holistic, real-time view of themselves and their environment. A system in which personalized experiences that are highly tailored to one's preferences and needs are the norm, not the exception, and where care and services can be accessed quickly and seamlessly. Consumers are increasingly willing to share their personal data through wearable technology, smart appliances in the home, and even with the home itself. This vast pool of data forms the basis of their personal health profiles, so that changes or deviations can be detected and addressed immediately. This information empowers consumers to take control of their well-being in ways that were impossible in the past, whether it's proactively heading off depressive episodes for Ruben, or getting Maria her time-released antihistamine well ahead of a high-pollen day. This data also provides more opportunities than ever to glean novel insights into the health of entire communities, and to enable research and scientific breakthroughs at a rate that will only increase exponentially as technology continues to evolve and to integrate into our daily lives. Tailoring care individually based on ever-advancing capabilities to capture, interpret, and act on near-perfect data in real time is a radical change. This change will require a complete rebuild of today's healthcare system and the collaboration of several actors, some old and many new. Those with deep roots in care delivery must ask themselves how they can use data and technology to transform what well-being and care delivery means. Players in the health ecosystem will include non-traditional ones. For example, those focused on the data platforms and tools that enable this new model of health. And regulators, financiers, and intermediaries will all play a new role in this new vision. Disruptive thinking and a commitment to emerging technology are more important than ever before, because the future isn't as far off as it seems. In fact, it's at your very fingertips.
I hope you can see through that short video that, as it said, it's very much the future, as we call it, is very much down here at our doorstep. And really what we see is that there really are 6 trends that COVID has helped to accelerate within the healthcare ecosystem. And a lot of these you would have seen in the video that was just shown. So the first very much is around the customer or the consumer, as I would call it, and their expectations. And as you saw, consumers are now becoming more and more open and taking more ownership of their health and wellness. And it's all about providing the experience to these consumers. How do we provide a human experience there right across the entire healthcare spectrum? That also flows through in terms of how the delivery of care is being transformed. As you say, there's also a shift before COVID, just getting onto virtual platforms, doing a virtual consult. I think we all know that there were a lot of smaller players that had started off at that point in time that were really even getting 1,000 or should I say a few hundred teleconsults a month, was a success. Whereas with COVID coming on, they were getting thousands a week, sometimes tens of thousands a week. And very much with the onset of COVID, I think there are a lot more consumers that are very much open to having more virtual or various different modes of care delivery. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. At the same time, consumers are also taking more interest in terms of not just healthcare in terms of treatment or treating an illness, but really in terms of health and wellness. There's very much focus as people are sitting down, locked down, as I am, and I think many of you are as well. There's a very much focus in terms of not just about how do I go and treat, but how do I even prevent getting to that stage. The whole digital disruption, I think, the past 3 days, you've probably heard a lot, but the whole onset of digital has really disrupted not every single player in the ecosystem. I mean, we saw about how, Dr. Nimmi and her team have been driving efficiencies and so on in their organization. But if you look at every single player in the ecosystem, they're being disrupted digitally. And that has also brought about new players into the ecosystem. So one question to also think about is how are these new players then play out within the ecosystem? And then even for organizations like yourself, how can you work with them? Data and interoperability, I think we heard a lot about it. You also saw in the video. As we get more and more digital, is the opportunity to pick up a lot more data. Data interoperability will also increase or play a key role. And really in terms of how do we form a more complete profile of the patient and in leveraging that as well in terms of addressing much larger healthcare agendas. So the whole onset of advanced analytics, IoT, AI, machine learning, onset of 5G, those are becoming more and more critical within the healthcare space as well. In some of the other markets as well, the concept of value-based care has been around for a while. But I think with COVID, that has also been accelerated. And we can see more of that even starting to happen in our region here as well. And of course, the sixth aspect is with a lot more of digital and data coming into play, the whole regulatory compliance and monitoring is also being stepped up. Questions about data privacy, personal data, how are those being addressed, increased transparency. So those are also issues to be looked at. So what does that mean? We put all these trends together. What we're seeing is that the health delivery model of care is being shifted. Right. As I said, primarily now this is all centered around the consumer. And notice that I say consumer as opposed to patient, right? Because as we said, health is now no longer about treating an illness, but very much about the consumers are now looking at the healthcare professionals to really take control of their health as a whole, which means health and wellness, and not only when I'm down in for treatment. And across the entire spectrum, not just physical wellness, but mental, emotional, and that leads down to financial and social wellness as well. And consumers are getting more and more discerning. And we see this, I think, even in our markets in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, as the focus is shifting, not just, as I said, towards health and wellness as well. Consumers are now being more and more open to wearables, how to get more constant data for themselves so they can see how they're doing from a health and wellness perspective. Started off with things like just counting the number of steps I do, but now it's becoming more and more sophisticated in terms of, you've got smartwatches and devices that you can also put on and track your ECG and so on along the day. But then with COVID as well, there's also the onset of remote monitoring. As given the situation that we're in, patients were not able to come into the hospital. So the whole onset of actually doing the monitoring remotely, getting the data, uploading it, is also a concept that consumers and patients are becoming more and more open to. What that allows then is also for to get more vast amounts of data at different points in time across that whole patient consumer journey, across the whole healthcare journey. The onset of testing, contact tracing, you know, not something that I think most of us would be open to, but I think with COVID, that is also becoming more and more accepted. But the shift here is, how do I get the testing done in a very convenient and safe environment? So there will be shifts. There's openness, but there are shifts on how we can do that in a more regular basis, which then leads to even precision diagnostics. How can you take the data that's coming through on a regular basis to these wearables, remote monitoring, real-time data that actually goes back to the healthcare providers or the caregivers, and what does that impact be to the consumer itself? Leading on from that would also be in terms of what are some of these insights that we can actually get from it, really leading to the prescriptive, the predictive analytics on how we can actually manage patients' care. When does it actually have a trigger for the patient to actually come in to have a face-to-face consult with the doctor, or is this something that we can do virtually? The whole push out in terms of precision medicine is a concept that, well, it has been going around in the last couple of years, and there are some players that are really pushing hard there. But I think with the whole push towards digital and data, that would also be accelerated. Similarly, in terms of how do we use all this data and insights that we're getting to really drive the population health analytics? Is that something we can leverage to, control consumers' eating behaviors, right? Their exercise behavior. How do we have some push notifications and behavioral nudges so that we can actually control population health better? And then, of course, there's the whole shift in terms of the intervention and the treatment side. In the past, it's been very much, you come into the hospital for your treatment. It's very much in hospital. Whereas, with COVID, it is really, there are broader options in terms of how do we find a balance between in-hospital and those remote models that we could be looking at, whether it be virtual or other kind of settings that we'll look at in a few moments. And more so then with the integration with the other aspects across the ecosystem, right? Integration of the EMR, EHR, how do I get all these data points that are there and integrating into the system? Again, linking it to telemedicine and to some of these other platforms that are there. And then, of course, as consumers are now getting more and more involved and focused around health and wellness, how do then we also then push out in terms of education and counseling and advocacy, leveraging all the apps and tools that we already have in place. But ultimately, the focus and the push of the healthcare ecosystem is really to get an experience that is seamless and automated as much as possible, but really integrated across all the different players and all the different touch points across the ecosystem. And a question to ask then would be, what could be the role that you could play in this shifting models of care? So we touched on this maybe a little bit, just double down on how do we see this model of care changing, particularly and it will be driven from the provider perspective, where we start at we see it across 4 different steps. So we start at the bottom, where the provider will really think about what is their consumer-centered strategy. How are they going to address their patient needs across, as we said, the whole health spectrum from a health and wellness perspective? Does the onset of value-based care, how does that come in? The remote monitoring and so on. How are all those coming in? How do we actually optimize the cost efficiencies within the healthcare system, and also mitigate really the development to comorbidities? Now, and with that, what are the offerings that they'll be looking to do over and above the traditional treatment offerings that they'll be having in place? Remote monitoring, as I said, would be one of those. Home infusion, are they looking at medication delivery? Is it patient supports that they're looking at, which really then provides visibility of the patient, or should I say the consumer's state of affairs, even between all these clinical care visits, and the vast amounts of data that are going to be coming through at different touch points along the way. Now, there's also an opportunity here for organizations like yourself, because a lot of these touch points in terms of the data and the diagnostics that's come through would actually be going through your labs and your different organizations. And then when they go on and they look from a care setting, again, the type of offerings that we look at, really finding a balance between in hospital care and also the home health setting, the utilization of different tools and frameworks that can actually be used. And how do you do it in lower cost settings? Again, there are opportunities to leverage there. And really then going up to what are the infrastructure that needs to be put in place to enable the success. The whole the technology, infrastructure, data, having automated workflows really to drive the clinical and administrative decision-making will also be key, right? And also what is the role of the workforce as they go to interpret all these insights that are coming through. But as we think about how these providers are looking at it, they will need to work with the broader ecosystem, with players like yourself, with all the different data and insights that are coming through at all points across the patient journey. And as we look at even in terms of how do we see that model changing, really so that, you know, the drive is really to bring care closer to the patient. In some markets, it's probably going to be a little quicker than others, but we do see some of these shifts already happening in our markets here in Southeast Asia, and I think also in Indonesia. The hospital setting, as I say, we expect that to go down, as well as with the post-acute care. You know, some of the services that we think will be going up, it will be in terms of imaging, laboratory services, ambulatory care. Those will be some of where we see directionally they could be, those could be some of the services that we see there'll be more demand on as this ecosystem and the delivery of care will shift. Now, the numbers are more driven from a West, you know, US and Europe perspective, but I think directionally this is what we would expect to see, even in our markets here in Asia and in Southeast Asia. So what does that mean in terms of, you know, the labs of the future? Really, how is it going to be driving the sort of patient-centric care and the whole data and analytics agenda? First, as you said, it's very much driven around being patient-centric and really data-driven. I think with all the data and the insights that comes through your organizations, as we say, you know, really put you in a very good position to say, how can that be leveraged to work together with the providers and the other players in the ecosystem, right, across the patient journey. The future is really about at-home diagnostics, as we say. There will be more and more of a shift to what can be done in the home setting, which really will, you know, what kind of testing can we actually be done? Can the patient actually receive at-home diagnostic kits, do the test, put it into the kit, and the data is then linked back to, you know, sort of centralized data, data monitoring systems, be it with the healthcare provider, or even going back to your labs to actually say what would be the next best action for the patients to take into play. And those would be expectations that consumers and patients will also be looking at. There's also, as I said, with the vast amounts of data that are coming through, and really the position that your organizations have really put you in a prime position to see how can we actually manage and really get the best and the efficiencies out of that data, so that to benefit the clinicians, also the patients, but also making it accessible to broader players across the ecosystem, and right down even to the broader public health agenda. This data will also be used to drive value-based care. The insights, as Dr. Nimmi was saying, you know, what comes out and which tests are coming through, when is the test, is there a peak coming at some point? That is valuable information that can also be driven and drive the agendas, whether it's in the public and the private healthcare sector. And the third area I'd say is very much in terms of the whole disruption around technology. You can see a lot of the technology giants coming in. There's larger trends coming in terms of preventive healthcare, pathology, analytics, you know, the whole testing that's happening there. And a lot more of the startups are, you know, already coming up in this place for very innovative solutions in the health tech space. And how is it about integrating some of these new players and working together with them are there opportunities for collaborations as they come up and work with you in the position that you have? So just touching a little bit in terms of that whole patient experience, as the whole healthcare system shifts towards really providing a patient experience, and as consumers are also expecting that, as you said, with the COVID times in places like Singapore and I think in a lot more of our markets soon, we'll be getting home rapid antigen test kits for COVID that we can do at home in a safe and convenient environment for very reasonable costs. And can you imagine if that data would come through even for other test kits that will be coming around? I think patients will be very much open to it. But that data then goes back into a centralized system where, whether it's to the healthcare professional, or even, is there a role that your organizations could play, at least as a first point of call, to say what would be the next port of call for the patient? Is that, where do they go to seek care? Is it back to the hospital? Is it an outpatient facility? Do they actually go on and do a virtual consult? Would that be the next best course of action? But ultimately, just bearing in mind that the patient, or should I say the consumer, is very much going to be the center of the health and wellness experience going forward. And this is a bit of a busy slide, but we really want to say that the whole onset of technology is disrupting the space. And as we know, they've got the larger players, and you know who they are, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts of this world. They're really putting healthcare as one of their key priorities in their strategies, right? And really building out the healthcare cloud market. Now, there are some of our markets, I think, are a little bit already about going to cloud, but what we can see is that with these new virtual care capabilities that are coming out with remote monitoring, coordinating patient care across the various parties, players across the ecosystem, this would be one of the key shifts that we would see in the space. The World Health Organization, as we all know, is also pushing for point of care testing, is really one of their top priorities, really driven by COVID. But I guess at the end of it, as we said, it's very much what consumers would be expecting to get going forward as well. And with the whole onset of 5G coming on, you're already seeing that going on in China, where there is a lot that is being done remotely, really because of the speed of their 5G there. As we come on and get 5G in our part of the world, the whole push towards the IoT, remote monitoring, really leveraging AI and machine learning will really be accelerated here. So really the question is, what is the role that we can play as well in that space? And also we're seeing that as the ecosystem becomes closer and closer knit, the different players across the ecosystem are also collaborating and having a lot more partnerships. So pharma, medtech companies are also working with the providers, working with the startups to really see how can they bring it's speed to market. How do they bring their solution, whether it's a digital solution or otherwise, really closer to the patient, whether it's in the hospital setting or in a more remote setting. And similarly, from a software licensing and partnership perspective, there are plenty of examples that we see out there in terms of organizations that are really leveraging on the real world data that is coming through. And I think this is where a lot of the insights that even organizations like yourself have access to generate some of these insights and real world evidence that are really being used to push forth and really change the way we do R&D, as we've seen with the onset of the vaccine in the last year or so. And with that, of course, there's also, as I mentioned, the whole rise of healthcare-based health tech startups, unicorns that are really coming into play, some within our region and some in the broader space. And I think with here, I'll just like to pass it on to Steve and give a perspective on what we're seeing within Indonesia and closer to home. Steve?
Thank you, Kavita. I guess, can you hear my voice okay?
Yes.
I hear some echo. Okay. So I guess you point out a very interesting point, Kavita, on the interoperability in the area where we want to develop certain solutions from customer-centric perspective. So if you look at the ecosystem right now in Indonesia, you will see a lot of organizations, they're creating their own apps to touch on the consumer. The JKN, they have JKN Mobile, Rumah Sakit Pondok Indah, they have their own apps. In the laboratory environment, you have Periksa Lab, you have Periksa ID, even Prodia, they have their own app as well. So I think a lot of these companies or organizations are trying to reach out to the customer. But I think one of the lacking point that we've seen in Indonesia that you currently pointing out very important is interoperability. And one of the important aspect of the interoperability is a shared data. And that's one thing that's currently being faced in Indonesia right now. I mean, if you look at the way the government is handling the COVID-19 situation in Indonesia, where you have several apps that dedicated for this, for tracing and tracking, for example. So we have Jaki, which is for Jakarta, and you have also the Peduli Lindungi apps, the kind of thing. And actually, there is also a mandatory reporting for laboratory to report any case or symptoms that they found during the testing of the COVID-19 to the Ministry of Health system. But what we've seen is that sometimes there are issues in the fundamental areas. For example, when you log in into the certain system, the system is not working, the system is not ready to cover this kind of amount of traffic that comes into the system. So these are fundamental issues that are being faced by Indonesia right now. So one is in terms of infrastructure. I think not just in remote areas in Indonesia, because that's quite apparent. Even in a study that we've done in 2019, we've seen areas like in Sulawesi or even in some area of Timur, in Timor, for example, they're still lacking of electricity. So that currently hinder a lot of effort for us to move forward to digital transformations. But then another area that I like to point out on the regulation side, I think if you look at the whole telemedicine environment in Indonesia, there has been the latest regulation made by the government is only issued in 2020. And that's basically looking at the definition of telemedicine, but not necessarily covering more basic ways on, for example, how we can encourage patients to talk to the doctor more while navigating the whole COVID-19 issues, you know. So, let's say, for example, right now, the doctor is not allowed to issue a diagnosis without really looking at the patient or touching the patient physically. That's actually one of the issues that we are highlighting at that time, right? On the other hand, if you look at the current investment situation in Indonesia, because the Omnibus Law implementation, there's a lot of healthcare sector in Indonesia is currently open for foreign direct investment. So that also creates a bit of a dynamics for all the existing players in Indonesia right now on how they can advocate the government to be more open in terms of collaboration, further partnership with all the other players in the market, but on the same time also strengthening themselves in order to be prepared for the foreign direct investment that might come in the short term in the future. So those are the things that probably we need that I like to highlight for Indonesia. Revert back to you, Kavita.
Thank you, Steve. And I think what we wanted to maybe just to sum up in terms of where we see, and I think you know, to some of the points that Steve has also mentioned, you know, what would be some of the opportunities, I guess, for organizations like yourself, right, within the diagnostic and in the lab space, and is there an opportunity to shift the game? I think if we just summarized it, the sort of 3-4 areas that we see is that, as you've heard with some of the examples that you know, that we shared, and what we're seeing as well in the space is that with the whole rapid accelerated digital transformation, very much the focus has been speed to market, right? So whether it is a pharma or a medtech or a provider that's coming to space, it's very much about getting the service, whatever it may be, right down to the patient, to the consumer, with speed. And I think there are opportunities to leverage, you know, your position, and particularly with the amount of data that and analytics you have, to actually do some collaborations in that space. The other piece, I guess, would also be really in terms of, as I said, going into some of these partnerships on how exactly is it working with some of these other providers in the ecosystem, as I said, whether it's with a medical device or a biotech or a pharma company, but really in terms of what are some of these partnerships, and even leveraging with some of these tech players and so on that are coming into place on how do we push that forward. With the onset of what we're seeing as well, with the sort of the whole vaccine development and so on, I think we've also, I think it's all clear that regulators are also going to be opening up to how R&D is being done. We're not saying that R&D is not going to be done, but there will be some shifts and I think some expectations in terms of how clinical trials can be designed and the speed of the trials. And that's potentially an area that players like yourself being the heart of all the data and the testing and is an opportunity to play there, and then leading off, of course, in terms of the whole real world evidence, the whole ecosystem around it. I think with COVID-19, it's actually been accelerated on how do we actually leverage real world evidence really to treat and test out these new treatments more quickly, and very much, as I said, organizations like yourself are very much at the heart of that play. So I guess it's an opportunity really to step back and say now, in terms of a lot of the work and the efficiencies that the focus has been driving in terms of getting the tests out and almost the focus can be more in terms of focusing on getting that factory business up and running and being as efficient as possible. But what are some of the other opportunities to play in, as we see these shifts in the health ecosystem? Now, I know a lot of this seems very broad and some of it quite futuristic, but we really wanted to leave you in parting one of the solutions that has already come into play. And whilst it's still in initial stages, leveraging on AI and machine learning, this could really give you a sort of a sense of what a conversation that one of our patients or consumers could have with a doctor, Dr. Lambda, in the not so distant future. So with that, pass it on to, we'll play the video just to close this off. Thank you.
Today, I'm excited to share our latest breakthrough in natural language understanding, Lambda. It's a language model for dialogue applications, and it's open domain, which means it's designed to converse on any topic. And while it's still in research and development, we've been using it internally to explore novel interactions. For example, say you wanted to learn about one of my favorite planets, Pluto. Lambda already understands quite a lot about Pluto and millions of other topics. Let's listen to a conversation the team had with Pluto a few days ago.
I sense your excitement. Ask me anything.
Tell me what I would see if I visited.
You would get to see a massive canyon, some frozen icebergs, geysers, and some craters.
It sounds beautiful.
I assure you it is worth the trip. However, you need to bring your coat, because it gets really cold.
I'll keep that in mind. Hey, I was wondering, have you ever had any visitors?
Yes, I have had some. The most notable was New Horizons, the spacecraft that visited me.
That must have been exciting.
The team that created New Horizons was very excited to see me. I also sent them back a picture of myself since I had not been seen up close before.
Thank you. It was just an example to see that, maybe the future isn't so far away. With that, thank you very much. And I'll pass it back to you, Good Devi.
Yes, thank you, Kavita, and also Pak Steve. It's very, very interesting speech from both of you. And we have many colors about the digital transformation. Yeah. Now we will have 20 minutes, I think, or 15 minutes for discussion. The first question coming from Avinash Ramesrao Padun. Yeah, sorry if I wrong pronunciation. Yeah, from TMC extract to Dr. Nimmi. For calculation of moving average, how much of samples batch needs to be calculated? If they're actually abnormal values, how it differentiates from error and actual while taking into consideration.
Okay, thank you for the question. So moving average, as I said, that to determine, the first thing you have to set up a batch size. So batch size, there are literature which gives guideline for determining the batch size. Particularly when we are determining the batch size, we have to ensure that it is not so small that we start to get too many outliers, and it should not be so large that we tend to miss the errors. So practically what we did, there is a publication which says that you can determine the ST, analytical ST, and you determine the population ST. So looking at the, when you look at the population mean and population ST, so population ST divided by the analytical ST can give you an idea about the batch size. But practically speaking, it's a trial and error method. With experience you learn. You can also consider, like Westcott says, that to any meaningful average is that when you have a mean of at least 20 points. So to begin with, you can consider that also. So if you refer to the literature, there are various ways which are used, but typically you will learn with your experience. And the second question is, how do you know that the error value is not included? So the moving average is meant to identify systemic error. If there is any random error cannot be identified by moving average. But I said that when you set up a moving average, we observed for 2 to 3 weeks that what is the average normally we observe. And when we had set that moving average, we had set the limit. So if there is any systemic error, whether it's a negative bias or a positive bias, you will have an outlier in your moving average and you will be able to identify that systemic error. But definitely random errors cannot be identified by using moving average. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it's clear. Thank you, Dr. Nimmi. Yeah, I have a question and actually the discussion for the Deloitte teams that you talk about trends that are changing the healthcare ecosystem, and also all the transformation focus on customer-centric, right? Then my question is, how urgent the digital transformation we need nowadays, and especially after pandemic, in terms of customer centricity?
Maybe I can start first, and Steve, you can jump in. So I'd say that there is an urgency in the sense that the digital journey has already begun, and now is the time to continue with that journey. I think before the pandemic, you know, particularly in the healthcare space, the pace of change has been slow within the digital space. Whether it's from the consumer side or even from the provider side, and with the pandemic, you know, it has really accelerated that shift. Now is the time to continue with that shift. Will we? So if I could put it, we started off at this level. With the pandemic, we went up to this level in terms of digital transformation. Will we remain there once, you know, things get settled? Possibly not. We probably end up somewhere in between. But we must continue with that pace to make that shift. If we leave it for too long, then there is a possibility that we'll go back even further, and that momentum will be lost. So with consumers, and to a certain extent, consumers, what we have seen in some of the markets, are asking for more in terms of digital engagement. There are some areas where they say, this actually works better for me now. I don't necessarily want to go back to what it was before the pandemic. So there is already a shift in some consumer mindsets to say, I'm willing to, to take it up a notch. But it's not a one size fits all for everyone. Every market will be different. The therapeutic areas will also be different, because for maybe some chronic diseases might be easier to get started just because you rather than getting a patient that comes in every month, for instance, to come in to see the doctor face to face, you could mix it between some virtual consults and some face to face consults. So that it has to be taken in a step-by-step basis. But to the short answer, I guess, to that question is there is an urgency and we must continue to push. It also gives an opportunity for the broader ecosystem to really come together. It will be challenging. There are some, big challenges in terms of data and interoperability and so on, but it is the opportunity to take some of those baby steps to move in the right direction so we get a better view of the entire consumer, I would say, rather than the patient. This is the time to do this. I don't know, Steve, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Indonesian market at the moment, we did a research in early 2019 at that time. So we asked our respondents. There were around 1,000 respondents spread around 14 cities across Indonesia. When we asked them whether you are familiar with the brand of teleconsultation apps that are in the market, 90% of them in average say yes. But then when we asked them whether you have used that number dropped to only about 10 to 15%. So at that time, people know, but they don't really use it. Probably there are trust issues as well. When there's some trust issue or there are some knowledge issues as well when you talk about using these apps. But then when the pandemic started, we do a little bit of an follow-up research. The number jumped the increment is quite high, meaning that in terms of changes that's happening right in the organization, it's not only because we need to change, but it is demanded by the consumer, because people now expecting something that's more convenient, something that's what Kavita mentioned, seamless services. That's why you will see companies like Grab partnering with Ping and Good Doctor, offering Grab Health, or Gojek together with Halodoc, providing some consultation services there, meaning that in the future, your competition will just come from your fellow lab or current ecosystem players, but also coming from big tech player as well. That does not just happen in US or Europe, but it's already happening in Indonesia. And the second thing is that when it comes to transformation, innovation, it's always ahead of the regulation. But that should not stop us to keep innovating to the future. I know that there are issues with, for example, patient data. Right now, the House of Representatives is currently looking at the draft of personal data protection law, for example. Before that happened, we still need to continue, because when that law is passed, and then you start to look at the market, it's too late already, because you've seen what happened in other more advanced market. Once the market is ripe, there are already thousands of players in the market. Especially now, I mentioned also about this earlier, that government is opening investment from outside as well to Indonesia. So as local players, you need to continue. And again, always linking your organization's vision with the customer. As I said before, a lot of organizations now creating apps, but whether this app is really useful, whether this app is really being used, I mentioned some of the example like Peduli Lindungi or Jaki, whether this app is really being used by people in Indonesia or Jakarta in particular to report cases in COVID, for example. That's another case, So, but then this did not stop us to keep innovating to the future and looking at what the customer wants now and the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. And do you think that the consumers now they are ready to accept the digital transformation? And since we have different generation, right? I talk about customers, doctors, and also patients. Yeah, we have two customer segment. Yeah, doctors and also the end customer, our patients. So how ready they are for accept this transformation from your experience, perhaps from Kavita from other countries and also from Indonesia, Pak Steve.
Maybe I will start, then maybe Kavita can add on later on, looking at what's best practice in other markets. But in Indonesia, when we did a project around 3-4 years ago for Hospital Indonesia implementing hospital management system, there's a lot of issues implementing this, especially in terms of the users. A lot of users are not really familiar in use. For example, when prescribing, instead of writing, you need to type into a computer. That's an issue at that time. It's in other markets or other industry, it might not be a huge issue, but in healthcare, it's a very big issue because a lot of decision made is driven by these users. So there are a lot of actions to be taken. I mean, in order for us to accommodate this level of difference in terms of generations, doctors in Indonesia, for example. I think the more I interacted with doctors, especially young doctors, the more they are acceptance to this kind of behavior. I think they also become accustomed to patients challenging them on the decision they made in terms of prescription or the diagnosis they made. So there are a lot of discussions going on in the private settings in comparison to in the past, you know. So I think doctors now are adjusting to this new innovation, to this development. From the customer perspective, once you feel the easiness of using an app to consult with a doctor and getting a seamless experience, and again, I think one of the challenge in Indonesia is that a lot of the consumer in Indonesia only use the apps when you have promo in the apps, you know, just like when you order a Grab food or Go food, or whatever, you will use that apps because you have promo. There's a promo or a discount into that app. So there is a problem in that area, but the more people use this, the more people are accustomed to the easiness of interacting with the healthcare professionals in that manner. I think it's only going to be more prevalence in terms of the usage of this. I cannot say any timeline, but I would say that if people are demanding more and more the easiness of interacting with doctor in that manner, I think the government will at the end of the day will need to follow suit and then creating a more accommodating regulations for us.
Yeah, maybe I can just quickly add some points to that. And maybe I will start with the consumer in this case. So what we're seeing in the markets across, and I'll keep it to Southeast Asia because they were still closer to home as opposed to going out to, you know, to the US and so on. We are seeing that some markets stronger than others are actually pushing, the consumers are actually pushing, or they're becoming more open to these levels of engagement. And on a few different points. One is that they are getting to be more and more conscious from a health and wellness perspective. So it's not just that when I get ill, I want to consult someone, but they are looking in terms of, if we look at, I think over the last 1 year or so, the number of downloads and applications, you know, apps and subscriptions to these health and wellness sites and apps have actually gone up over the last year or so. And this is across the markets. Some markets a little bit more developed markets like Singapore, which is generally a little bit more health conscious. But we are also picking up in Malaysia, for instance, and even areas like Vietnam and so on, it's starting to pick up. It varies, of course, the model. I mean, if it's a free model, then, you know, subscription, then people are more willing to it. Whether they're willing to pay for it, that's a different topic. But at least it's becoming more of an affinity to go digital and go online. I think that's one. The other thing, if I want to add to that, is that the demographics, exactly, Devi is saying, it does vary by demographics, right? As you would expect, the younger population are obviously more open, right? They want everything now, convenient, get it, and their mobile phone is everything to them. So that, I think, you know, is there, but they're not necessarily the biggest use for health, or should I say these teleconsults and so on, just because they don't tend to be in that space. What we have seen though is that the higher end, you know, the gray hair kind of demographics, right? The elderly, they have also started to be a little bit more comfortable in terms of getting to at least engaging and, you know, using a virtual screen to do some kind of a conversation and so on, whereas before they would not. It could be as simple as starting with a WhatsApp call, which they're a little bit more familiar with. They would do with their friends as opposed to going to a formal site. But that, of course, will take time, right? But there is a bit more of an uptake, one driven because of the need. Will it replace, you know, the actual face-to-face consult and interactions? Absolutely not, for sure. It will only be, you know, there are only certain things, right? It will do. But I think at the end of the day, and I'll quickly wrap this up with, where do we see the doctors coming? I think the doctors, two parts to it. One is, as Steve said, they are being given what consumers are looking for. I think that's one. But the other point is that even the providers are now looking to see, how can I be more efficient? Providers, meaning the hospital groups, are saying, how can I get my doctors to be more efficient? And they are also driving some of this as a broader system, right? Putting CRMs in place, putting a teleconsult in place. But then more importantly, the challenges that are there would be, there has to be a business model that has to be put in place that works for the doctors, that incentivizes them to go onto these platforms, to use it. And, you know, how efficient is it going to be? What's in it for me? So it's a journey that we have to take them on as well. But we're right, we are starting to see that is actually moving in that direction.
Okay, thank you. There is one question from the participants, from James Pardian Simanjuntak, but I think you have explained this, Steve. Yeah, but I will read the question. Do you think countries should start changing their laws to accommodate telemedicine instead of physical visits? That's the first question. And the second, what about the future of healthcare for the non-tech savvy? I think we have discussed this. And I think if you you'd like to answer and explain more about the first question about the regulation, please add some more.
Yeah. So again, the technology or the application that we have right now is not designed to replace human touch. Like, again, it's for augmenting human touch. Again, so the application, the digital transformation that we're kind of doing is not designed to fully replace human interaction, because I think unlike any other industries, there are still empathy needed when you want to talk to a patient, when you feel the pain the patient is having. It is very crucial. I mean, again, like right now, even in this setting, a famous doctor in Indonesia, usually those are being described as someone very empathetic, other than, of course, being good at his own field. But again, it's described also being very empathetic to the patient. So that's the first concept. Second, in terms of digital healthcare in Indonesia, we are still in a very infancy stage, I would say. Again, I mentioned to you earlier that the latest regulation is only being issued in the late 2020s, basically very fundamental regulations without giving us enough room to move forward. I would say more revision or addition need to be added into the regulation. Why government should take that route? I mean, if you look at the current cost being borne by BPJS for this COVID-19 issues, it's quite high. Even before this COVID pandemic, you've seen news where BPJS is currently facing deficit, you know. And the reason is because our patient is kind of flocking into the system. And those are patients that are looking for physical visit to the doctors. And every physical visit, you get paid, a doctor get paid a certain X amount of money, for example. Imagine if a doctor able to see a patient through teleconsultation, for example. And that's also being covered by BPJS. So that happened in US, where during the COVID-19 pandemic, the US oversight body of Medicare and Medicaid is actually provide a little bit of allowance for patients to do virtual care to the doctors. You know, before it was only for rural areas, but they opened it for the whole country at that time. But so that kind of initiative can be done in Indonesia. But again, of course, a lot of parties or stakeholders need to be involved in making the decision. It's not only the government. It's not only the government, but also the association of doctors, the patients, the healthcare providers, such as clinics and hospitals, need to be involved in the discussion. But talking about this, second is that virtual healthcare actually help you in terms of access. One of the fundamental issue in Indonesia is that we are lacking of number of doctors. We are lacking number of beds. Imagine if there's this lacking number of beds can be replaced by something virtual, whether the virtual consultation, virtual radiology, or even virtual lab, for example. So a lot of issues can be solved through digital. But again, this is not a magic pill that you can easily take and swallow. There's a lot of changes need to be made and need to be discussed beforehand. And it's not an easy journey, just what Kavita has mentioned. In other markets, more advanced than us, it's also been a subject of a big debate in the past. So I think that will happen also in Indonesia. The future of healthcare in Indonesia, to answer your second question, I think there are a lot of aspects that can be improved. I think one of the fundamental issues that I shared earlier is that how we can have an access to interoperable data source, for example. Right now, if I, for example, a patient in a certain hospital, let's say, for example, hospital A, and I have to do a checkup in hospital B, they don't have data of me from hospital B, what has been provided to me in hospital A. So this creates a little bit of gap, for hospital B to provide a more precise treatment for me, because there's a lot of historical that's not missing. So I think one aspect the government needs to be done is to create, we'll call it healthcare information exchange, where a lot of information of the medical records are being centralized in one place, and everyone that has access to it, of course, is being regulated and so on and so forth, monitored. But that would be create some sort like an ideal situation for Indonesia. It will not be short. I'm sorry to say for that, Pak James, but that's the route that Indonesians should take to the future. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Steve, and also Kavita. Now, I'd like to ask organizing committee, since this discussion is very interesting, I will ask a bit more time. Yeah, this is the last session for us, so I think we will have more flexible for another 5 minutes, perhaps. I will ask to Dr. Nimmi. From your experience, does digital transformation through total lab automation give impact to deliver better outcomes in terms of patient centricity? Yeah, we discussed about the patient centric, despite the turnaround time and also the efficiency in the process.
Yeah, definitely digital transformation, as I mentioned, it's not only the improving our processes, it is ultimately the entire aim and the goal of improving the process is to deliver better, to have better outcomes, patient outcomes. So definitely the digitalization is giving us insights into our processes, how we can deliver, how better we can deliver, and how can we achieve the customer satisfaction. And to some extent, we are also looking at the ways how the newer requirement, the newer generations they have in terms of, as I mentioned by Kavita, also the younger generation, they are more adaptable and they are they use the digital platform. So definitely the digitalization is helping us not only in terms of processes, but also in achieving customer satisfaction.
It's great. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nimmi. Yeah, I think the time is up. So in a summary, the digital transformation is important for us. We have to take this opportunity for a journey to the future. The time is now, even though the acceptance from the consumers. I think it's not ready yet, but we have to keep innovating, as Deloitte team mentioned, and it will improve the process and also the outcomes, yeah, to more accessible for the patient and also more convenient for patient service, yeah. So the customer centricity now is the trend. All the changing the way we serve the customers, our customers, yeah, from hospitals and also from the clinical laboratories. Thank you very much for all the speakers. It's very, very interesting presentation and discussion. We appreciate all your effort to prepare all the presentation. Thank you.